Sarah Martinez had always been different from other women her age. While her friends spent their college years at parties and shopping malls, she was crawling through mud with a rifle on her back. The Navy SEAL training program had pushed her beyond every limit she thought she had. Years of brutal physical conditioning, combat training, and mental toughness exercises had shaped her into something most people couldn't understand. Now, 5 years after leaving the military, Sarah worked as a software engineer in downtown Seattle. She had traded her combat boots for sneakers and her uniform for casual clothes. Most of her co-workers had no idea about her military background. She preferred it that way. The corporate world felt strange after years of life-or-death missions, but she was learning to adapt. On this particular Tuesday evening, Sarah stayed late at the office to finish a project deadline. The building was almost empty by the time she packed up her laptop and headed for the parking garage. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as her footsteps echoed in the concrete space. She had parked on the 3rd level, far from the elevator, because she had arrived late that morning. As she walked toward her car, something felt wrong. Her military training had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every alarm bell in her head was ringing. The garage was too quiet. The usual sounds of traffic from the street below seemed muffled. She slowed her pace and scanned the area around her vehicle. 3 men emerged from behind a large SUV parked 2 spaces away from her car. They moved with purpose, spreading out to block her path. Sarah's heart rate stayed steady even as adrenaline began flooding her system. She recognized the formation immediately. These weren't random muggers looking for a quick score. This was planned. The man in the center was tall and muscular, wearing a leather jacket despite the warm weather. His 2 companions flanked him on either side. The one on the left had a spider web tattoo crawling up his neck, while the one on the right kept his hands in his pockets, suggesting he might be carrying something. Sarah stopped walking and assessed the situation. She was outnumbered 3-1. The nearest exit was behind the men, too far to reach safely. Her car was still 20 feet away. The parking garage had security cameras, but that wouldn't help her in the next few minutes. She was on her own. The leader stepped forward with a confident smile that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Hey there, pretty lady. Looks like you're all alone down here." His voice carried a threatening undertone that confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't going to be a simple robbery. Sarah's military training automatically kicked in. Her breathing remained controlled while her mind rapidly calculated distances, angles, and potential weapons. The concrete pillars could provide cover. The fire extinguisher mounted on the wall was within reach. Her car keys, held between her fingers, could become an effective striking weapon. But most importantly, these 3 men had no idea what they were dealing with. They saw a young woman in business attire carrying a laptop bag. They expected fear, screaming, and helplessness. What they were about to encounter was 6 years of elite military training compressed into 120 pounds of controlled fury. The spiderweb tattoo man moved closer from the left while his partner approached from the right. They were trying to surround her completely, eliminate any chance of escape. It was a textbook intimidation tactic that probably worked on most victims. Sarah allowed them to think they had the upper hand. She took a small step backward as if frightened, while secretly shifting her weight onto her back foot. Her laptop bag slid off her shoulder into her left hand. To the attackers, it looked like nervous fumbling. In reality, she was preparing to use the bag as both a weapon and a shield. The leader was now close enough that she could smell his stale cigarette breath. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, reaching toward her. "Just cooperate, and maybe you'll walk out of here." That was when Sarah made her decision. These men had chosen the wrong victim on the wrong night. Her years of Navy SEAL training were about to turn their planned attack into the biggest mistake of their lives. The moment his hand moved toward her, Sarah's transformation began. The scared office worker disappeared, replaced by a warrior who had survived some of the most dangerous training in the world. Her next few moves would determine whether she became another crime statistic, or whether these 3 predators learned a lesson they would never forget. Time seemed to slow down as the leader's hand reached toward Sarah's arm. In the Navy SEALs, she had learned that the first 3 seconds of any confrontation determined everything that followed. Those critical moments separated survivors from victims. Sarah's response was lightning fast and completely unexpected. Instead of pulling away or screaming, she stepped forward into the attack. Her laptop bag swung upward in a vicious arc, catching the leader square in the face with 15 pounds of computer equipment and files. The solid impact sent him stumbling backward, blood streaming from his broken nose. Before the other two men could react, Sarah spun toward the man with the spider web tattoo. Her military training had taught her to always neutralize the closest threat first. He was reaching into his jacket, probably for a weapon, when Sarah's elbow drove into his solar plexus with devastating force. The breath exploded from his lungs as he doubled over in pain. Sarah followed up with a knee strike to his face and he dropped to the concrete floor like a sack of potatoes. Two attackers down in less than 5 seconds. The third man finally understood this wasn't going according to plan. He pulled a knife from his pocket, a 4-inch blade that gleamed under the parking garage lights. "You crazy witch," he shouted, slashing wildly at Sarah as she backed away. Sarah's SEAL training had included extensive knife fighting instruction. She knew that panicked attackers with blades were often more dangerous than skilled ones because they were unpredictable. This man was swinging the knife like he was chopping vegetables with no technique or strategy. She waited for the right moment, then grabbed his wrist with both hands as he lunged forward. Using his own momentum against him, she twisted his arm violently while stepping to the side. The knife clattered to the floor as his shoulder joint made a sickening pop sound. The man screamed in agony and fell to his knees, clutching his dislocated shoulder. Sarah kicked the knife away, sending it sliding under a nearby car where none of them could reach it. But the fight wasn't over. The leader had recovered from the laptop bag blow and was charging at her with rage in his eyes. Blood covered his face and his broken nose was already swelling. He outweighed Sarah by at least 60 pounds and had the advantage of size and strength. What he didn't have was training, discipline, or the ability to fight through pain that had been drilled into every Navy SEAL. Sarah ducked under his wild swing and drove her fist into his kidney with surgical precision. The blow would have dropped most men, but he was running on pure adrenaline and fury. He grabbed Sarah in a bear hug, trying to use his size advantage to overpower her. This was exactly the situation her instructors had prepared her for during countless training exercises. Bigger, stronger opponents who thought they could simply muscle their way to victory. Sarah drove her heel down onto his instep with all her weight behind it. The small bones in his foot crunched and his grip loosened immediately. She followed up with a headbutt that caught him right in his already broken nose, sending fresh waves of pain through his skull. As he staggered backward, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. A security camera in the corner of the garage had been spray-painted black. These men had planned this attack carefully, disabling the surveillance first. This wasn't random crime. They had specifically targeted her, but there was no time to think about the implications. The man with the spiderweb tattoo was starting to get back to his feet, shaking his head to clear his vision. She needed to end this fight now before they could regroup or call for backup. Sarah picked up her laptop bag and moved toward the garage exit, but the leader blocked her path one more time. He was breathing heavily, blood streaming from his face, but he wasn't giving up. "This isn't over," he gasped. "You have no idea who you're messing with." That threat confirmed Sarah's suspicions. This attack was personal somehow, though she couldn't understand why. She had been living a quiet civilian life for years, avoiding conflicts and keeping a low profile. Someone had sent these men after her specifically. The leader made one final desperate lunge, but Sarah was ready. She sidestepped his attack and delivered a perfectly executed uppercut to his chin. His head snapped back and he collapsed to the concrete floor, finally unconscious. All 3 attackers were now down and no longer a threat. The entire fight had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. Sarah's heart was pounding as she surveyed the damage. Her business clothes were torn and dirty, and her knuckles were scraped and bleeding. But she was alive and unharmed while her attackers would need serious medical attention. The spiderweb tattoo man was still conscious but couldn't stand up straight. The knife-wielding attacker was whimpering about his dislocated shoulder. The leader was completely unconscious and might have a concussion. Sarah pulled out her cell phone to call 911, but then she hesitated. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. These men knew her routine, had disabled the security camera, and had specifically targeted her. Calling the police might bring unwanted attention to her background and military training. She needed to think this through carefully. Her quiet civilian life might be over, and she had to decide what her next move would be. Sarah stood in the parking garage, cell phone in hand, as the reality of what just happened began to sink in. 3 men lay groaning on the concrete floor around her, and she was the one still standing. Her Navy SEAL training had taken over so automatically that she hadn't even thought about her actions until now. She decided to call 911 despite her concerns. Leaving the scene would only create more problems later. As she waited for the police to arrive, she searched through the attackers' pockets, looking for any clue about why they had targeted her specifically. The leader's wallet contained a driver's license identifying him as Marcus Webb, along with several $100s in cash. More concerning was a folded piece of paper with her home address, work schedule, and even her car's license plate number written on it. Someone had been watching her for weeks. The man with the spider web tattoo had a cell phone with recent text messages that made Sarah's blood freeze. Target confirmed. Office building, level 3 parking. Make it look random, but make sure she doesn't walk away. The messages were from a number she didn't recognize, but the implications were crystal clear. This wasn't a random attack or even a planned robbery. Someone wanted her dead, and they had hired professionals to make it happen. The question was why. She had been living quietly for 5 years, working a normal job, staying out of trouble. What could have triggered this level of organized violence? Police sirens echoed through the parking garage as 2 patrol cars arrived. Sarah quickly put the phone and note back where she had found them, deciding to let the investigators discover this evidence themselves. She didn't want to appear too knowledgeable about criminal investigations. Officer Rodriguez was the first to approach her. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who immediately noticed her torn clothing and scraped knuckles. "Ma'am, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Sarah shook her head. "I'm okay, just shaken up. These 3 men attacked me and I defended myself." She kept her explanation simple, avoiding any mention of her military background for now. The officer looked at the 3 men still sprawled on the ground, and then back at Sarah with obvious surprise. "You did this to all 3 of them by yourself?" "I got lucky," Sarah replied, which was technically true even if it didn't tell the whole story. "I think one of them might have a concussion and another one's shoulder is hurt pretty badly." Paramedics arrived and began treating the attackers while Detective Lisa Chen took Sarah's statement. Chen was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who clearly sensed there was more to this story than a simple mugging gone wrong. "These injuries are pretty severe for a random self-defense situation," Detective Chen observed as she watched the paramedics load the unconscious leader onto a stretcher. "Do you have any martial arts training or military experience?" Sarah hesitated, knowing this moment would determine how much attention her case would receive. "I have some self-defense training," she said carefully. "I took a few classes after moving to the city." Detective Chen didn't look convinced, but she continued taking notes. When the investigators searched the attackers, they found the note with Sarah's personal information and the incriminating text messages. The detective's expression grew more serious as she realized this was an attempted assassination, not a random crime. "Ms. Martinez, I need to ask you directly. Do you have any idea why someone would want to hurt you? Any enemies, ex-boyfriends, business disputes? Anything that might explain why these men had your personal information?" Sarah genuinely didn't know how to answer that question. She had been careful to avoid making enemies in her civilian life. Her military service had been classified, but she had never been involved in operations that would create personal vendettas. She had simply been a highly trained soldier following orders. "I honestly can't think of anyone," she told the detective. "I work in software development, I keep to myself, and I haven't dated anyone in over a year." "This doesn't make sense to me either." The detective handed Sarah her business card. "I believe you, but someone clearly has a problem with you." These men were professionals, not street thugs. The cash, the detailed surveillance notes, the disabled security camera. This was a sophisticated operation. As the attackers were taken away in ambulances under police guard, Sarah realized her quiet civilian life was officially over. Word would spread about the woman who single-handedly defeated 3 armed men in a parking garage. Her co-workers would ask questions. Her neighbors would gossip. Her carefully maintained low profile was destroyed. But more importantly, whoever had hired these men was still out there. The attack had failed, which meant they now knew she was more dangerous than they had expected. They would either give up and disappear, or they would come back with better preparation and more firepower. Sarah drove home through the dark Seattle streets, constantly checking her mirrors for signs of surveillance. Her apartment building looked normal, but she parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, using skills she hadn't needed in years. Her apartment was exactly as she had left it that morning, but it no longer felt safe. Someone knew where she lived, where she worked, and what her daily routine looked like. They had enough resources to hire professional killers and conduct detailed surveillance. As Sarah packed an overnight bag, her mind raced through possible explanations. Had she unknowingly witnessed something during her military service? Was this connected to one of her classified missions? Or was there something in her current civilian life that she was missing? One thing was certain. She couldn't stay in Seattle any longer. The attack tonight had failed, but there would be others. Professional killers didn't give up after one failure. They regrouped, learned from their mistakes, and came back stronger. Sarah had two choices. She could disappear completely, change her identity, and spend the rest of her life running and hiding. Or she could use her military training to figure out who was hunting her and end the threat permanently. As she looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, Sarah saw not the software engineer she had become, but the warrior she had always been underneath. The Navy SEAL training never really left. It just waited patiently for the moment when it was needed again. That moment had arrived. Sarah spent the night in a cheap motel outside Seattle, paying cash and using a fake name she had memorized years ago during her military training. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even though she had taken every precaution to avoid being followed. Sleep came in short bursts between checking the locks on her door and peering through the curtains at the parking lot. Every car that drove by made her tense up, ready to fight or run. The attack had awakened something inside her that had been dormant for 5 years. By morning, she had made her decision. Running and hiding would only delay the inevitable. Professional killers were patient and persistent. They would eventually track her down no matter how well she disappeared. The only permanent solution was to find out who wanted her dead and eliminate the threat at its source. Sarah's first step was to contact someone from her military past who might have answers. Master Chief Petty Officer James Sullivan had been her mentor during SEAL training and had kept in touch with her even after she left the service. If anyone would know about threats connected to her military background, it would be him. She drove to a public library in Tacoma and used their computer to access an encrypted email account she hadn't touched in years. The message she sent to Sullivan was brief. Package delivered successfully. Need to discuss quality control issues. Same coffee shop, same time tomorrow. It was a code they had developed during her service. Package delivered meant she was in immediate danger. Quality control issues indicated the threat was serious and ongoing. Sullivan would understand that she needed help urgently. While waiting for his response, Sarah began her own investigation into the 3 attackers. She used public record searches to learn more about Marcus Webb, the leader of the group. His criminal history included assault charges, weapons violations, and suspected connections to organized crime. The spiderweb tattoo man was identified as Tommy Reeves, a career criminal with ties to several criminal organizations in the Pacific Northwest. The third attacker, David Park, had a military background, but had been dishonorably discharged for violence against civilians during his service overseas. What struck Sarah as significant was that all 3 men had been hired muscle, not the people making the decisions. They were expendable assets used to carry out someone else's plan. The real threat was still unknown and still planning their next move. Sullivan's response came within hours. Coffee sounds good. Usual table. Bring your appetite, you'll need your strength for what's coming. The message confirmed her worst fears. Sullivan knew something about why she was being hunted, and his warning suggested the situation was more dangerous than she had realized. Sarah spent the afternoon acquiring supplies she hoped she wouldn't need. Cash withdrawals from multiple ATMs to avoid creating a clear money trail, a prepaid cell phone bought with cash from a convenience store, basic medical supplies and energy bars that could keep her functional for days without stopping. Most importantly, she visited a storage unit she had rented years ago but never told anyone about. Inside were items from her military service that she had kept despite regulations requiring their return. Night vision equipment, encrypted communication devices, and other specialized gear that might mean the difference between life and death. The coffee shop meeting was set for the next morning at a small cafe near Pike Place Market that she and Sullivan had used for previous meetings. It was public enough to discourage violence but private enough for sensitive conversations. They had always sat at the corner table where they could watch both the entrance and the back exit. That evening, Sarah did something she hadn't done since leaving the military. She went through her complete pre-mission preparation routine, physical exercises to ensure her body was ready for combat, mental visualization of potential scenarios and her responses to each one, equipment checks to make sure everything was functional and properly concealed. She also wrote a letter explaining everything she knew about the attack and her suspicions about who might be behind it. If something happened to her during the meeting with Sullivan, she wanted the police to have some direction for their investigation. The letter went into a safety deposit box at a bank across town, along with copies of all the evidence she had gathered. As the sun set over Seattle, Sarah realized this might be her last quiet moment for a long time. Once she met with Sullivan and learned the truth about why she was being hunted, there would be no turning back to her civilian life. She would either neutralize the threat and disappear forever, or she would join the statistics of soldiers who didn't survive their transition to civilian life. But she had made her choice in that parking garage when she decided to fight instead of become a victim. Her Navy SEAL training had saved her life once, and it would have to carry her through whatever was coming next. The woman who had spent 5 years trying to forget her military past was gone. In her place stood a warrior who had just remembered why she had been trained to be one of the most dangerous people on the planet. Sarah checked her equipment one final time and tried to get a few hours of sleep. Tomorrow would bring answers, but it would also bring new dangers that would test every skill she had learned as a Navy SEAL. The real fight was just beginning. She fell asleep with her hand resting on the grip of a pistol she had hoped never to need again. Old habits died hard, and some skills were too important to let rust away completely. Her military training had been waiting patiently for 5 years, and now it was time to put it back to work. The hunt for her would-be killers was about to begin, and Sarah Martinez was no longer running away from her past. She was embracing it fully, with all the deadly consequences that would follow. Sarah arrived at the coffee shop 30 minutes early, using the time to survey the area and identify potential threats. Her military training had taught her that meetings with unknown dangers required careful preparation and multiple escape routes. Master Chief Sullivan was already there when she arrived, sitting at their usual corner table with his back to the wall. At 55, he still looked like he could outfight men half his age. His gray hair was cut military short, and his eyes constantly scanned the room with practiced awareness. "You look good, Martinez," he said as she sat down across from him. "Civilian life been treating you well?" Sarah didn't waste time on pleasantries, until 3 men tried to kill me in a parking garage 2 nights ago. "What aren't you telling me, Chief?" Sullivan's expression grew serious as she described the attack and the evidence she had found. When she finished, he was quiet for several minutes, staring into his coffee cup like he was reading tea leaves. "There's something you need to know about your last mission," he finally said. "Operation Sandstorm wasn't just a routine extraction like you were told. The target you pulled out of Afghanistan wasn't just any intelligence analyst." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Operation Sandstorm had been her final mission before leaving the military. They had extracted Dr. Elena Vasquez from a Taliban compound where she had been held for 3 weeks. The mission had gone smoothly, and Vasquez had been debriefed and returned to civilian life. Dr. Vasquez had discovered something during her capture, Sullivan continued. The Taliban wasn't holding her for ransom or propaganda. They were trying to get information about a weapons program she had been consulting on, a program that officially doesn't exist. The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind. What kind of weapons program? Advanced biological warfare research. Vasquez had been working on defensive countermeasures, but her research could easily be reversed to create offensive weapons. The Taliban wanted that information to sell to the highest bidder. Sarah remembered Dr. Vasquez clearly. She had been quiet and terrified during the extraction, but she had seemed like a legitimate victim of circumstances. "So why is someone trying to kill me now?" "The mission was successful. We got her out safely." Sullivan's face grew even more grim. "Because Dr. Vasquez disappeared 3 months ago, along with all of her research notes and computer files. Intelligence agencies believe she wasn't actually captured by the Taliban at all." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. She was working with them from the beginning. The whole extraction was a setup. "We think she staged her own capture to get inside our intelligence network," Sullivan confirmed. "Your team didn't rescue a victim. You transported a spy directly into the heart of our most classified programs." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If Vasquez had been a double agent, then everyone involved in her extraction was now a security risk. They all knew details about classified operations, personnel, and procedures that could compromise national security. "How many of us are left?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "You're the last one," Sullivan said quietly. "Lieutenant Morrison died in a car accident in Virginia last month. Sergeant Rodriguez was killed in a home invasion in Texas 3 weeks ago. Petty Officer Chen died in what looked like a random mugging in San Francisco. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm and too crowded. Sarah's teammates were being eliminated systematically, made to look like accidents and random crimes. She was the final target on someone's list. Who's doing this? Vasquez herself or whoever she's working for?" Sullivan pulled out a tablet and showed her several photographs. These were taken at Rodriguez's funeral. Same faces showed up at Morrison's memorial service, and Chen's wife reported seeing similar men watching their house before the attack. The photos showed professionally dressed men who looked like government agents or corporate security. They weren't street criminals or Taliban operatives. This was a domestic operation with significant resources and planning. "My theory is that Vasquez is working for a private military contractor," Sullivan explained. "Someone who wants to sell biological weapons to the highest bidder without government oversight. Your team's knowledge of how she was extracted makes you all loose ends that need to be tied up." Sarah studied the photographs, memorizing faces and looking for any details that might help her identify the organization behind the killings. "Do you have names? Locations? Anything I can use to fight back?" "That's why I wanted to meet in person," Sullivan said, sliding a small flash drive across the table. "Everything we know is on there. Financial records, suspected personnel, possible safe houses. But Sarah, these people have unlimited resources and government connections. Fighting them head-on would be suicide." She pocketed the flash drive without hesitation. "So what's my alternative? Keep running until they catch up? Let them murder me like they did the others?" Sullivan's expression showed he had expected this response. He had trained her after all, and he knew she would never back down from a fight, especially one involving the deaths of her teammates. "There might be another way," he said carefully. "We think Vasquez is still in the country, probably preparing to sell her research to foreign buyers. If we can find her before the sale happens, we might be able to expose the whole operation." "We?" Sarah asked. "I'm officially retired, but I still have contacts in the intelligence community. People who want to see justice done for Morrison, Rodriguez, and Chen. This isn't just about keeping you alive anymore. It's about stopping a biological weapons program that could kill millions of people." Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her personal survival was no longer the only thing at stake. If Vasquez succeeded in selling weaponized biological research to terrorists or hostile governments, the consequences would be catastrophic. "What do you need me to do?" Sullivan smiled grimly. "What you do best. Hunt down the enemy and eliminate the threat. But this time you'll be operating without backup, without official support, and without any safety net if things go wrong." Sarah thought about her dead teammates and the 3 men who had tried to kill her in the parking garage. She thought about Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had manipulated their honor and dedication to serve her own treacherous purposes. "When do we start?" The flash drive Sullivan had given Sarah contained more information than she had expected. Financial records showed payments from a shell company called Atlantic Defense Solutions to various criminal organizations across the country. The timing of these payments corresponded exactly with the deaths of her former teammates. Sarah spent 2 days studying the intelligence files in her motel room, mapping out connections and identifying patterns. Atlantic Defense Solutions was owned by a larger corporation called Meridian Industries, which had contracts with several foreign governments for security consulting services. The trail led to a private estate outside Portland, Oregon, where Dr. Elena Vasquez was reportedly staying under heavy security while finalizing her biological weapons research. According to Sullivan's sources, she was planning to auction her work to the highest bidder within the next week. Sarah knew this was likely a trap. The estate was too perfect a target, too easily discovered through intelligence channels that might be compromised. But it was also her only lead, and time was running out before Vasquez disappeared forever with weapons that could kill millions. She drove to Portland using back roads and paying cash for everything to avoid creating a trail. Her equipment included night vision goggles, climbing gear, electronic surveillance tools, and weapons she hoped she wouldn't need to use. The old Navy SEAL was fully operational again. The estate was a fortified compound surrounded by high walls, security cameras, and armed guards. Sarah spent an entire day observing the property from different positions, noting guard rotations, vehicle movements, and the locations of security equipment. What she discovered confirmed her suspicions. The security was professional but not military grade. These were corporate contractors, not trained soldiers. They were good enough to stop most threats, but they weren't prepared for someone with Sarah's specialized training and experience. More importantly, she identified a weakness in their perimeter security. A storm drain that ran under the east wall of the compound could provide access if she was willing to crawl through 200 yards of concrete tunnel in complete darkness. That night, Sarah began her infiltration of the estate. The storm drain was even more unpleasant than she had anticipated, filled with stagnant water and debris that made silent movement nearly impossible. But her SEAL training had included similar exercises, and she reached the compound's inner grounds without triggering any alarms. The main house was a sprawling mansion with lights on in several rooms despite the late hour. Sarah counted at least 8 security personnel patrolling the grounds and manning fixed positions. Getting inside undetected would require perfect timing and flawless execution. She waited until the guard rotation changed at midnight, then used the confusion of personnel movement to slip past the perimeter security. Her night vision equipment allowed her to navigate in complete darkness, while the guards relied on flashlights and area lighting that compromised their night vision. Sarah reached the main house and used specialized tools to disable the alarm system on a second-story window. Breaking and entering wasn't typically part of Navy SEAL training, but she had learned some unconventional skills during her years of service. Inside the house, she could hear voices coming from a room on the first floor. Sarah moved carefully through the darkened hallway, avoiding the few areas that had motion sensors or security cameras. The mansion was luxurious but not particularly well defended against someone already inside the building. She reached a position where she could observe the meeting taking place in what appeared to be a library. Dr. Elena Vasquez was there, older and more haggard than Sarah remembered, but definitely the same woman they had extracted from Afghanistan. She was speaking with 2 men in expensive suits who looked like the type of people who bought and sold weapons for a living. "The research is complete," Vasquez was saying. "The biological agent can be weaponized using common laboratory equipment. A single test tube could contaminate an entire city's water supply within hours." One of the buyers leaned forward with obvious interest. "And the antidote? Our clients will want protection for their own populations." Vasquez smiled coldly. "The antidote exists, but it's only effective if administered within 6 hours of exposure. After that, the mortality rate approaches 95%. Sarah felt sick listening to the casual discussion of mass murder. These people were planning to sell biological weapons to terrorists or hostile governments who would use them against innocent civilians. Her mission was no longer just about personal survival or revenge for her dead teammates. She activated a small recording device to capture evidence of the weapon sale, then began planning her next move. Simply calling the police wouldn't work. These people had government connections and would likely be gone before any official response could be organized. Sarah needed to stop the sale immediately and capture Vasquez alive so she could be interrogated about other aspects of the biological weapons program. But she was outnumbered at least 10 to 1, and she had no backup or support if things went wrong. As she watched the meeting continue, Sarah noticed something that changed everything. One of the buyers was showing Vasquez photographs of potential targets for the biological weapons. Major cities in the United States and Europe where millions of people lived and worked without any idea they were being targeted for extermination. The scope of the planned attack was beyond anything Sarah had imagined. This wasn't just about selling weapons to foreign buyers. Vasquez was planning to help coordinate simultaneous attacks on multiple countries, creating a global catastrophe that would kill more people than any war in human history. Sarah made her decision. She couldn't wait for official help or backup that might never come. Too many lives were at stake, and she was the only person in position to stop the weapon sale from happening. She checked her equipment one final time and began moving toward the library. Her Navy SEAL training had prepared her for impossible odds and life or death situations. This was exactly the kind of mission she had been created to handle. The woman who had tried to live a quiet civilian life was gone completely now. In her place was a weapon of war, and she was about to remind everyone in that house why Navy SEALs were considered among the most dangerous people on Earth. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to end Dr. Elena Vasquez's biological weapons program permanently. Sarah moved through the mansion like a ghost, using every skill she had learned during her years as a Navy SEAL. The lives of millions of people depended on stopping the biological weapons sale happening in the library below, and she was the only person who could prevent a global catastrophe. She positioned herself outside the library door and listened carefully to the conversation inside. Vasquez was explaining the delivery method for the biological weapons, describing how small teams of operatives could contaminate water supplies in 12 major cities simultaneously. The beauty of this approach, Vasquez was saying, is that by the time symptoms appear, the agent will have spread throughout the entire metropolitan area. Emergency response will be completely overwhelmed, and millions will die before any effective countermeasures can be implemented. Sarah had heard enough. She kicked open the library door and burst into the room with her weapon drawn. The element of surprise was complete. Vasquez and her two buyers were sitting around a conference table with documents and laptop computers containing the biological weapons research. "Nobody move," Sarah commanded in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, you're under citizen's arrest for treason and conspiracy to commit mass murder." Vasquez looked stunned to see Sarah alive. "You should be dead," she said. "I paid a fortune to have your entire team eliminated." "My teammates are dead because of you," Sarah replied, keeping her weapon trained on the three conspirators. "But I'm still here, and your biological weapons program ends tonight." One of the buyers made a sudden move toward a briefcase on the table, but Sarah was faster. She put a bullet through his shoulder, sending him crashing to the floor. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the mansion and would certainly alert the security guards. "The next one goes through your head," Sarah warned the remaining buyer, who immediately raised his hands in surrender. Vasquez tried to reason with her. "You don't understand the bigger picture. The research I've developed will revolutionize warfare. Countries will pay billions for this technology, which is exactly why it needs to be destroyed," Sarah said. She grabbed the laptop computer and began downloading the files to a portable drive. She needed evidence of the weapons program, but she also needed to ensure the research couldn't be reconstructed. Heavy footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of security guards. Sarah had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the library. She quickly zip-tied Vasquez's hands behind her back and grabbed the research documents from the table. The first security guard appeared in the doorway, just as Sarah was finishing her evidence collection. She shot out the room's lights and dove behind the conference table as bullets began flying in both directions. Her night vision equipment gave her a significant advantage in the darkened room. She could see the guards clearly while they were shooting blind. Sarah eliminated 2 of them with precise shots, then used smoke grenades to create additional cover. More guards were arriving from other parts of the mansion. Sarah estimated at least 6 more hostiles approaching her position. She had limited ammunition and no backup, but she also had something they didn't expect: the determination to prevent millions of innocent deaths. Sarah activated a small explosive charge she had placed on the mansion's electrical system during her infiltration. The entire building went dark, giving her night vision an even greater advantage. She could move freely while the security guards stumbled around in complete darkness. She fought her way through the mansion room by room, using her superior training and equipment to overcome numerically superior opponents. These corporate security guards had never faced anyone with her level of skill and determination. Within 10 minutes, the mansion was secure. Several guards were dead, others were wounded and no longer a threat, and the surviving conspirators were zip-tied and waiting for authorities to arrive. Sarah had already called in federal agents using Sullivan's intelligence contacts, but her mission wasn't complete yet. The biological weapons research was still intact, and there might be other copies stored elsewhere. Sarah needed to ensure that Vasquez's deadly work could never be used to harm innocent people. She found Vasquez's personal laboratory in the mansion's basement. Sophisticated equipment filled the room, along with samples of the biological agent and detailed notes about its development and deployment. This was the source of the weapons that could have killed millions. Sarah methodically destroyed everything. She smashed computers, burned research notes, and used chemical accelerants to eliminate any trace of the biological agent samples. When she was finished, nothing remained that could be used to recreate Vasquez's work. Federal agents arrived just as Sarah was completing the destruction of the laboratory. They found her sitting calmly in the mansion's living room, surrounded by evidence of the biological weapons conspiracy and detailed recordings of Vasquez's plans for mass murder. Detective Chen, the same investigator who had worked Sarah's parking garage attack, was among the federal team. She looked around the mansion with obvious amazement at what Sarah had accomplished single-handedly. "Ms. Martinez," Detective Chen said, "I think it's time you told us about your real background. Software engineers don't usually conduct military operations against biological weapons dealers." Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. Her civilian cover was completely blown, but it no longer mattered. The threat was eliminated, her teammates were avenged, and millions of innocent lives had been saved. "I used to be a Navy SEAL," she said simply, "and I guess old habits die hard." Master Chief Sullivan arrived with the federal team and found Sarah giving her statement to investigators. He listened with obvious pride as she described how she had infiltrated the compound, gathered evidence, and eliminated the biological weapons threat. "What happens now?" Sarah asked him as the federal agents finished processing the scene. Sullivan looked at the destroyed laboratory and the captured conspirators. "Now you disappear again, but this time with official help. New identity, new location, new life, the kind of deep cover that even people like Vasquez can't penetrate." Sarah nodded, understanding that her old life was over completely, but she had made peace with that reality. Some things were more important than personal comfort or safety. As she walked away from the mansion, Sarah realized that her Navy SEAL training had never really been about military service. It had been about preparing her for moments exactly like this, when ordinary people needed someone extraordinary to protect them from threats they couldn't even imagine. 3 men had attacked her in a parking garage and discovered that their intended victim was actually one of the most dangerous people on Earth. Their mistake had led to the destruction of a biological weapons program that could have killed millions of innocent people. Sarah Martinez disappeared into her new life, but she remained ready. Because somewhere out there other threats were developing, and other innocent people would need protection from dangers beyond their comprehension. Her Navy SEAL training would be waiting patiently for the next time the world needed a warrior.